Hello, this is Short Stories. Today's story is based on Gioacchino Rossini's most famous opera, The Barber of Seville. It premiered in 1816 at the Teatro Argentina in Rome. The opera was based on a play of the same name, which was first performed in 1775. Rossini was not the first to turn this comedic play into an opera. Giovanni Paisiello did it in 1782. Nicholas Isouard did it again in 1796. And Francesco Morlacci had a go at it in 1816. But only Rossini's version has stood the test of time. This story has been modified from its original version. It has been formatted to fit this screen. Vocabulary: billet. Billet. The soldiers were billeted in the local villages. Drawn and quartered. Drawn and quartered. The punishment for treason is to be drawn and quartered. Hairpiece. Hairpiece. Frank was embarrassed by his bald head, so he always wore a hairpiece. Infatuated. Infatuated. Sally has been infatuated with Tim since the first day they met. Keep up appearances. Keep up appearances. He struggled to keep up appearances. Obsequiously. Obsequiously. The servant obsequiously obeyed all of the king's commands. Pseudonym. Pseudonym. Samuel Clemens's pseudonym was Mark Twain. Public notary. Public notary. You need a public notary to certify this contract in order to make it legal. The story. In a plaza under the imposing shadow of Seville's famous Alcazar fortress stood a man accompanied by two musicians. He was serenading a young woman who was leaning out of her bedroom window on the second floor of an elegant townhouse. Her dainty chin rested delicately on her right palm as she listened bemusedly to the young man below. There, laughing in the sky, is the woman of my dreams, sang the young man. The young man's name was Count Almaviva, but today he was going by the name of Lindoro. He was a wealthy nobleman in his early 20s. Tall, rich, and handsome, he was confident that he could win the heart of the girl in the window. The reason why he was using a pseudonym was because he wanted to make sure the girl fell in love with him and not his money. I, Lindoro, do love thee forever, declared the Count. The girl sighed and smiled, but she was pulled back from the window by her legal guardian, Dr. Bartolo. Bartolo was a prominent lawyer in Seville. He had spent years cultivating a client list that included some of the biggest names in town. However, in order to keep up appearances, he had to spend a lot of money. So, when Rosina, the heiress to a large fortune, was orphaned, Bartolo wasted no time in declaring himself to be her legal guardian. His plan was to marry her on her 18th birthday, so as to acquire this large fortune for himself. And her 18th birthday was quickly approaching. In the plaza below, Lindoro stood dejectedly and stared at the now closed window of Rosina's bedroom. He paid the two musicians he hired and took a walk down one of the alleys connected to the plaza. He soon arrived at Sweeney Todd's discount barber shop on Fleet Street and entered the door. "Here's your wig back, Figaro," sighed the Count as he removed his hairpiece. "I take it the plan didn't work, sir?" asked Figaro. The Count shook his head and sighed. "There must be a way for me to meet her face to face," he lamented. "But Bartolo has her locked up in his castle. It's impenetrable." Figaro scratched his neck as he thought of a way to help his most valuable customer. "Only soldiers can get into castles, sir. I have an idea," said Figaro as he took another hairpiece off of the shelf. The next day, Rosina was having a singing lesson in the piano room of Bartolo's house. "I wrote a song by myself. Would you like to hear it?" Rosina said to her teacher, Mr. Basilio. The teacher, of course, said yes, and Rosina began singing a romantic song about a handsome young man. Bartolo, who was listening in the next room, became deeply concerned. "She's infatuated with that scoundrel. I have to get rid of him," he said to himself. The next visitor to the house was Figaro, the local barber. "Just a trim today, Figaro. Nothing fancy," said Rosina. "I heard your singing from outside. It was very lovely," said Figaro as he untied Rosina's golden tresses. The two started talking, and Rosina admitted that the song was about Lindoro. "Really?" said Figaro in feigned surprise. "I know that guy. He says that he's dying to meet you. Why don't you write him a letter, and I'll deliver it for you?" Rosina liked that idea and began writing while Figaro snipped off her split ends. Moments later, there was a knock on Bartolo's front door. He answered it and was surprised to see a disheveled soldier standing crookedly on his stoop. "What do you want?" asked Bartolo rudely. The soldier took a piece of paper out of his pocket and shoved it into Bartolo's face. "I'm with the 42nd Regiment of Foot," announced the soldier casually, "and I've been ordered to billet here at your house." Bartolo took the paper and read it carefully. "What nonsense is this?" barked Bartolo. "I have a special exemption from this requirement." The soldier scoffed and replied, "Prove it." Bartolo's face turned red, and he stomped back to his office to retrieve the document of exemption. While Bartolo was preoccupied, Figaro brought Rosina downstairs to meet the soldier. "It's me, Lindoro," whispered the soldier as he lifted his fake mustache. The two lovebirds exchanged letters just as Bartolo returned. "What is that?" he shouted, noticing a small piece of paper in Rosina's hand. "Give it to me now," he demanded. Rosina deftly swapped the letter for a piece of paper from her other pocket, without Bartolo seeing. "Here you go," she said gleefully. Bartolo snatched the paper from her hand and began reading aloud. 7 pairs of socks, 8 pairs of underwear, 2 petticoats, and 1 brassiere. Bartolo's face turned red with embarrassment as he realized that he was reading Rosina's laundry list. "Get out of my house right now!" he shouted at the soldier. Lindoro pretended to be drunk and began shouting obscenities at Bartolo. The ruckus these two men caused was so loud that it attracted the attention of the police. "I'm here in response to a noise complaint," announced the policeman. "Is there a domestic disturbance here?" Bartolo pointed an accusing finger at Lindoro and shouted, "Yes, officer! This drunkard is disturbing my domicile. I demand that you arrest him at once." The police officer took out his notebook to interview the accused. "Please state your name, last name, and occupation," said the officer. "I'll pay you 100 pesos to go on break early," replied Lindoro as he handed the officer some cash. The officer accepted the bribe, tipped his hat, and left. Bartolo was dumbfounded. He stared hard at the soldier and suddenly realized who he was. "Wait a minute. You're that reprobate from yesterday, Lindoro!" Lindoro gave Rosina a wink right before he leaped out of the door and ran down the street. "If I catch you around my house again, I'll have you drawn and quartered," bellowed Bartolo as he shook his fat fist at the fleeing Lindoro. The Count waited a few days before he made another attempt to contact Rosina. "You should lie low for a while, sir," advised Figaro. That advice proved to be very prudent for 2 reasons. It allowed Bartolo time to cool off, and it gave Figaro time to prepare a new hairpiece for the Count. This one was more elaborate than the last because it included a false beard as well. The Count knocked on Bartolo's door. Bartolo, expecting to see the music teacher, was confused to see an elegantly bearded gentleman standing on his stoop. "You're not Basilio. Who are you?" asked Bartolo. "Allow me to introduce myself," said the Count as he bowed obsequiously. "My name is Don Alonso, a close associate of Basilio. I regret to inform you that Basilio has fallen ill, but he has asked me to cover for him. I will be Rosina's music teacher today." Before Bartolo could think of what to say, Don Alonso let himself in and declared, "Basilio told me about how lovely your house is, but I must admit that it is more beautiful than he described." Bartolo, deeply befuddled, tried to keep up with the smooth-talking Don Alonso. "What illness did you say Basilio had?" he asked. Don Alonso tilted his head back contemplatively and answered, "Wuhan fever, I think. I'm not sure. I'm not a barber surgeon. Is this the way to the music room?" He did not wait for Bartolo to reply and immediately began climbing the stairs. Once inside the piano room, Don Alonso gave Rosina a wink and proceeded to begin the singing lesson. Bartolo watched from the corner of the room with his arms folded across his chest. "Are you sure you're a singing teacher?" he grunted. "These aren't the lyrics to this song." Don Alonso stopped singing for a second and replied, "These are the new lyrics. Surely a man as fashionable as you can recognize that." Don Alonso and Rosina kept on singing when Figaro arrived at the appointed time to give Bartolo a shave. "We should do it downstairs near the washtub, sir," suggested Figaro. But Bartolo plopped himself down on the nearest chair and said, "No, we will do the shave right here." And so Figaro pulled out his straight razor and basin to prepare for shaving. Rosina sang beautifully, but the song was not one anyone would recognize because Don Alonso came up with it on the spot. "Then I'm the one. You're not fooling me," sang Rosina in a sweet contralto voice. Bartolo frowned underneath his shaving cream. "What is that nonsense you're singing?" he asked. "Shh! Don't move, sir, or I might cut you," warned Figaro. The singing was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Go see who that is, Figaro," ordered Bartolo. Figaro ran downstairs and was startled to see Basilio, the real music teacher. "Didn't I tell you not to come today?" exclaimed Figaro. "I came to pick up this month's payment," answered Basilio. "Who's that singing up there?" Figaro tried to convince Basilio to leave, but he refused to leave without first getting his payment. "Where's Bartolo? Let me see him," demanded Basilio as he shoved Figaro aside. The expressions on everyone's faces when Basilio entered the piano room were quite a sight to behold. Figaro's face expressed fear and panic. Rosina's expressed wonder and astonishment. Don Alonso displayed embarrassment and confusion. But Bartolo's face was the most interesting to see, for it had turned purple-red with rage, and the smooth white foam on his cheeks jiggled as the anger pulsed through his body. "Lindoro!" he screamed. "I'll kill you!" Don Alonso, a.k.a. Lindoro, a.k.a. the Count, made a beeline for the closest door and hastily made his escape. That evening, Bartolo was pacing back and forth in his study. "Her 18th birthday is tomorrow," he muttered to himself. "I have to marry her tonight if I want to get my hands on that fortune." He rang the bell for his valet. "Take this to Ambrosio," he said, handing his servant a letter. "It's an emergency, so hurry." The valet saluted his master and ran out the door. Ambrosio was a public notary and a close friend of Bartolo. The letter contained a personal request. "Come at once," he had written, "and bring a marriage certificate." Bartolo gently knocked on Rosina's door. "We need to talk," he said calmly. Rosina let him in and asked what he had to say. Bartolo put on his best face and replied, "It's about that Lindoro boy who keeps stalking you. I know you don't want to hear this, but I have some terrible news. He is wanted for murdering the Pope." Rosina gasped and refused to believe it, but Bartolo stood by the story's veracity. "So you see," he explained in a sweet, affectionate voice, "you can't marry him. You are a noblewoman, and he is a lowly criminal. If you marry him, you'll be poor and an outcast. But if you marry me, you'll be able to maintain your wealth and social status." Tears were running down Rosina's face when she nodded her consent. "Good," said Bartolo. "We'll both sign the marriage certificate when it arrives at midnight. I'll leave you to put on your wedding dress." As Bartolo exited Rosina's room, a huge smile of self-satisfaction spread across his face. Not long after Bartolo left, there was a knock on Rosina's window. Curious, Rosina opened her window and was surprised to find Lindoro and Figaro on a ladder. "What are you doing here?" she exclaimed. "Shh!" replied Lindoro. "Someone might hear you. Let us in, please." Rosina moved out of the way to let her suitor and his companion into her room. At first, Rosina behaved coldly towards Lindoro. She sat on her bed with her arms crossed. Lindoro tried showering her with sweet words, but her mood did not change. "Rosina," he declared, "I have come to ask for your hand in marriage." Rosina leaned away from him and responded, "Bartolo says that you are poor and a criminal, and it is beneath the dignity of a noblewoman to marry you." Lindoro leaned closer and asked, "But do you love me?" Rosina uncrossed her arms and admitted that she did. Lindoro leaned in closer and whispered, "Then why not marry me?" Rosina wrestled with the idea for several seconds before she blurted out, "All right, I will." Lindoro jumped up and clapped his hands. "Figaro," he said, turning to his companion, "intercept that public notary, will you?" Figaro saluted his friend and rushed out the door. A few moments later, Figaro returned with Ambrosio. "What's going on here?" complained the notary. "This whole thing is highly irregular." Lindoro pulled Ambrosio closer and said, "All will be explained soon enough." The notary performed a civil wedding, with Figaro serving as the witness. Both the bride and the groom signed the marriage document. "Wait a minute," exclaimed Rosina. "You wrote the wrong name on the certificate." Lindoro smiled and, removing his wig, declared, "Do not fret about losing your social status, my dear, for I am not a common criminal named Lindoro. I am Count Almaviva of Seville." Rosina smiled and kissed her new husband. At that moment, Bartolo entered the room. He quickly read the faces of everyone present. All displayed joy and satisfaction. Bartolo's face twisted into a knot of chagrin and dismay. "What have you done?" he shouted. The Count explained everything to him. "What he says is true, Bartolo," said Ambrosio. Bartolo's mood changed from frustration to despair. "But the money," he moaned. "My next mortgage payment is due. How will I pay it now?" The Count stepped forward and handed Bartolo a sack of coins. "Do not fret, Bartolo, for I will allow you to keep the dowry." Bartolo smiled and thanked the man that just a few hours ago he had threatened to kill. "May love and faith eternally be seen to reign in you," he said as he shook the Count's hand. Turning to Figaro, the Count inquired, "Would you like to come work for me?" Figaro nodded his head enthusiastically. The Count then asked Bartolo to bring out the wine to celebrate the new marriage. Once everyone's cup was full of the best Tempranillo wine, the Count raised his cup and announced, "A toast to the Barber of Seville." Questions. Number 1. Who is the Barber of Seville? A. Figaro. B. Count Almaviva. C. Bartolo. D. Rosina. The answer is A. Figaro. Question 2. Who is Lindoro? A. Count Almaviva. B. Don Alonso. C. A soldier. D. All of the above. The answer is D. All of the above are the same person. Question 3. Why did Bartolo want to marry Rosina? A. He loved her. B. He wanted her money. C. He wanted to improve his social status. D. He promised her mother that he would. The answer is B. He wanted her money. Question 4. Why did Rosina want to marry Lindoro? A. She loved him. B. She wanted his money. C. She wanted to improve her social status. D. She promised her mother that she would. The answer is A. She loved him.